האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening, Dober Viecher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Vayera, and we are going to do the Zera Shimshon on section Yud Daled, number 14. Before we do, let's take a look at a pasuk that is actually from Parshas Lech Lecha, but it's very important for our discussion. So the Zera Shimshon says, this is Perak Yud Gimel, pasuk Yud Gimel. Ve'anshe Sodom ro'im v'chatoyim lashem me'od. And the people of Sodom were evil and sinful towards Hashem me'od, very much. So that's what the Zera Shimshon is going to talk about. Let's get right into the text of the Zera Shimshon. Od Isa Hassam. It also states over there. What that means is that the Zera Shimshon in his previous section Yud Gimel number 13, was discussing various sources, and one of them was a Gemara in Sanhedrin, and now he's going to continue discussing another aspect of that Gemara in Sanhedrin in this piece, in piece Yud Daled. Od Isa Hassam. It also states there, meaning in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, as you can see in the parentheses, Va'anshe Sodom ro'im v'chatoyim, and the people of Sodom were evil and sinful. That's the pasuk we just read. Rav Yehuda Amar. So in the Gemara it brings what appears to be an argument. Rav Yehuda says, ro'im begufam. When it says evil, it means with their bodies. They sinned with their bodies in terms of promiscuity. V'chatoyim b'mamonam, and they were sinful with their money, b'mamonim, and they were sinful with their money. So Rabbi Yehuda is basically translating the words for us. He's telling us what the words in the pasuk means. What does they were evil means? It means they were promiscuous. What does they were sinful means? It means they were sinful with their money, things like stealing from others and not giving tzedakah. They sinned in terms of the financial matters. B'masnisa tana, and a brisa it was taught, ro'im b'mamonam. When it says they were evil, that means they were evil with their money and financial matters. V'chatoyim, and when it says they were sinful, begufam, that's referring to sins of the body, such as promiscuity. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin appears to bring this argument between Rav Yehuda and a brisa about how to understand the words ro'im v'chatoyim, and it seems like Rav Yehuda understands them one way, and the brisa understands it in really the exact opposite way. V'Rashi olav hashalom b'chumash, and Rashi on Chumash, Peiresh, he explains, in his commentary on Chumash, Rashi explains, Kisvaras Rav Yehuda, like the opinion of Rav Yehuda. That means if you open a Chumash and you look at Rashi, Rashi will say that Ro'im means the people of Sodom sinned with their bodies. They were promiscuous. And Chatoyim, they were sinful. That means that they sinned with their money, financial things, just like Rav Yehuda stated in the Gemara in Sanhedrin quoted above. The Onkelos Tirgumo, and Onkelos translated it Kisvaras Hamasnisa, like the opinion of the Brisa. So Onkelos, if you look in his commentary, you'll see that he translated Ro'im as referring to the money, and Chatoyim, sinful, referring to the body. V'hikshu alav, and the commentators asked on Rashi, Loma hiniach perush targum. Why did Rashi set aside the explanation of Onkelos? Rashi very often, very frequently follows the explanation of Onkelos, and if he departs from it, there has to be a reason. So why did Rashi not translate the words Ra'im v'chatoim, evil and sinful, the way that Onkelos did? Why did Rashi say the opposite explanation? Ve'od, and another question, Lomo lo nokat kisvaras hamasnisa. Why did Rashi not follow the opinion of the brisa that's brought in the Gemara in Sanhedrin? The adifa misvaras Rav Yehuda, which should be considered more powerful, stronger than the opinion of Rav Yehuda. Why would that be? Because a brisa is just like a Mishnah. It was written by the Tanoim, those sages who were alive and were authors of the Mishnayos. And a Tana is considered more authoritative than a scholar who lived later in the period of the Gemara. Those scholars are called Amoraim, and Rav Yehuda lived in the later period, the period of the Gemara, and he was an Amora. So the second question is, why did Rashi decide to embrace the opinion of Rav Yehuda, a later authority, an Amora, and pass up the opinion of the Brisa, which was written by a Tana from an earlier period? We usually follow a Tana over an Amora. Ve'od yesh lismoa, and there's a third question, another question to wonder about. Ech Rav Yehuda yachlok al masnisa. How did Rav Yehuda himself argue against a brisa? The strength of a Mishnah and a brisa are so strong, and they represent the opinions of the Tanaim. Again, Tanaim lived in an earlier period than Amoraim, who lived in a later period. Those opinions of the Tanaim expressed in Mishnayos and Brisos, and for that matter also Toseftas, an Amora, a later authority, cannot argue against them. He can't just say, "Oh, I disagree with a brisa or a Mishnah," unless he finds another brisa or Mishnah to attach his opinion to support his opinion. But he can't independently argue against a brisa, as Rav Yehuda seems to be doing in this case. So the Zera Shimshon presents three questions on the based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which he opened with, and the way that Rashi understands the pasuk that we read, because Rashi follows the opinion of Rav Yehuda, the later authority, and thereby he seems to be going against the opinion of the Brisa, the earlier authority, and he also seems to be going against Onkelos, which is a very unusual thing for Rashi to do. So as we move forward, we'll see how the Zera Shimshon is going to explain things differently and with a unique perspective that will then allow him to answer these three questions. Next paragraph, V'yesh lomar, and we can say, Shelicha'ora koshal hakosuv, that at first glance, there's a problem with the pasuk itself. She'omar ro'im v'chatoyim. The pasuk said that the people of Sodom are evil and sinful. De'ipcha havale lemeimar, because the pasuk should have apparently said put those words in the opposite order. Chatoim, the people of Sodom were sinful, v'ro'im, and they were evil. Dechet mashma chet kal, because the word chet or chatoim, sinful, implies a lower level, a minor transgression. Kamo shogeg, for example, someone who does a transgression accidentally. That's what the word chet usually applies to. And to start off with, a person would commit a minor sin, and only later would he come to do a sin intentionally. So the Zera Shimshon says, in general, the way people work, the way people operate, is that they start off with lower level, more minor transgressions represented by the word chet, and then they progress, unfortunately, to more serious, more intentional and serious transgressions, averos, and that's represented by the word ra'im, evil acts, wicked acts. And so the Torah, one would think, should have said chatoim v'roim. The people of Sodom are sinful. They do low-level sins, and they're roim, and they've also progressed to doing true evil, truly intentional major sins. V'tzarech lomar, and we need to say, in order to answer that question, we need to say, de lashon chet, the word chet, shayich shapir lifomim, can sometimes be used biloshon pesha ve'ovon chomor, to refer to intentional sins and serious transgressions. So Zera Shimshon here is teaching us, starting off with a very important point, a very important building block. And it is that even though we might become used to seeing the word chet and thinking that refers to minor sins and unintentional sins, b'shogeg, that's not always true. He's about to show us and demonstrate clearly that sometimes the word chet can refer, and of course, chet is the root of chataim, of the word in the pasuk of sinful behavior, can sometimes refer to intentional, serious sins. Kedichsiv, as a pasuk says, ve'ech e'eseh v'chulei v'chatasi lelokim. This is Yosef Hatzadik talking, and he is speaking to the wife of Potiphar, and she wanted, of course, to seduce him. We know that famous story. And he said to her, how can I do this thing? How can I listen to what you're saying to be with you, who are my master's wife? V'chatasi lelokim, I will be doing a very serious sin to Hashem. V'tirgem unkelos ve'echov. Unkelos translates the word v'chatasi as ve'echov. And Zera Shimshon is going to explain what this word ve'echov means. Kemo shetirgem pesha achecha v'chatasam. Just like Unkelos interprets or translates the words pesha achecha v'chatasam, the intentional sin of your brothers, the intentional transgression of your brothers, and their sins. That pasuk comes from when after Yaakov Avinu died, and Yosef and his brothers returned from Eretz Canaan, where they had brought Yaakov Avinu's body for burial in Maras HaMachpelah, in the cave of Machpelah. The Torah tells us that the brothers were very worried that now that Yaakov had passed from this world, Yosef would show, so to speak, his true colors and take revenge against them for the way they had treated him and sold him into slavery. So they said to him, the brothers said to Yaakov, our father Yaakov, before he died, said that we should tell you to forgive pesha achecha v'chatasam, the serious transgressions of your brothers and their sins. And on the word pesha, intentional, serious sin, Unkelos translates it lechovei achecha v'lachata ehon. He uses that word chov again to translate the word pesha. So already we see that Unkelos understands the word chet and translates it sometimes the same way that he translates the word pesha. So since we know pesha means intentional, serious sins, therefore Unkelos is teaching us that the word chet can sometimes mean serious, intentional sins. And the Zera Shimshon continues, v'chein, and similarly, ma pish'i ma chatosi. On the pasuk when Yaakov is talking to Lavan and he says, what is my transgression? What is my sin? Unkelos translates, ma chovi ma surchani. Again, we see that the word pesha, that's our base word here, which we know means a serious intentional sin. Unkelos translates it with a lashon of chov, ma chovi, for ma pish'i. And Zera Shimshon continues with another example, v'tirgem nami, and Unkelos also translates al techetu vayoled, This is Reuven talking to the brothers after they came down to Mitzrayim to get food, and Yosef acting like he was not letting them know he was his brother, gave them a very hard time and said, I'm going to imprison you, and one of you can go back and bring down the youngest son, Binyamin, but you're all going to be in prison. And later on, Yosef said, only one of you can stay in prison, but he treated them extremely harshly, and they were terrified. So Reuven said, this is because you didn't listen to me all the way back when you wanted to do to hurt Yosef, and I said, Al techet to Vayera, don't transgress against the boy, meaning against Yosef. And Onkelos translates it, La sechovun, do not commit a serious transgression against Yosef. V'hachanami tirgem ro'im v'chatoyim, and here in our pasuk that we're considering about the people of Sodom being evil and sinful, Onkelos translated as bishin, they were evil, they were bad, v'chayovin, and they were chayovin. He translates the word chatoim as chayovin, and chayovin we've seen in Onkelos means a serious transgression, people who commit serious transgressions. Shehu lashon pesha. The word chayavin is a language we see in Onkelos consistently that means intentional, serious sins. So, what the Zera Shimshon has shown us is that our understanding of the words ra'im v'chataim was originally mistaken, and we have to correct it. We thought ra'im was the more severe word. They were ra'im, they were evil, they were wicked, they were intentional, malicious sinners, v'chataim, and they also committed less serious transgressions. That would not fit. That would not make sense. And Rashi pointed out right away, the Torah would not talk about their more serious sins and then say, and they also committed less serious sins. It would build it in the other direction. They committed less serious sins, and that's reflected in the word ra'im, and they committed more serious sins, and that's reflected in the word chatoim, even though in most other cases chatoim means less serious sins, even unintentional shogeg sins. That's not the case here, and that's what the Zera Shimshon has shown us, has demonstrated to us through careful analysis of the translation of the Targum Onkelos. Let's continue. V'hainu disnan, and this is what was taught in a Mishnah in Maseches Sanhedrin. Anshe Sodom ein lohem chelek la'olam haba. The people of Sodom do not have a share in the world to come. Dichsiv, it's written in a pasuk about them, our pasuk, ra'im v'chataim. They were evil and they were sinful. Ra'im ba'olam hazeh. They were evil in this world. V'chataim, and sinful la'olam haba, in the next world. So the Mishnah in Sanhedrin is telling us Ra'im refers to their transgressions in this world, and Chataim, sinful, refers to how they're going to be viewed, how they were viewed in Olam Haba. And that's where the more serious judgment of human beings takes place, the more consequential judgment and significant judgment. Uperish Maharsha, and the commentary of Maharsha on the Gemara explains, Shelo Yizkula Olam Haba, the people of Sodom will not merit the next world, Shegam Shom Yisharu Chayovim, because even there they will remain guilty, they will remain in their sinful state. Ad kan Lashono, until here is a quote from the Maharsha. Demuchach mikan, and this establishes, or this proves, shachatoyim hu yoser chamor me'roim, that the word chatoyim in our pasuk, sinful, is actually more severe, more serious than the word ra'im, bad or evil. Umishum hachi omar hakosov techila, and that's why, because of this, the pasuk used first the word ra'im. because it represents in this pasuk, not necessarily in other places, but in this pasuk, the word ra'im represents a lower level, a lower category of sins. Va'achar kach hatoim. And afterwards, it says, the pasuk says the word sinful with the language of chet, which in this pasuk represents the more serious, the more severe type of transgression. Uvein Rav Yehuda, uvein Hamasnisa. And whether or not we're talking about the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda or the opinion of the Brisa, bo'u lefaresh mahu ra'im u'mahu chatoim. They both coming to explain what is meant by ra'im, a lower level of sin, regarding the people of Sodom. U'mahu chatoim is what is meant by, what is intended by a higher level of transgression in reference to the people of Sodom. Next paragraph. V'hoil shematzinu, and since we find shebein dor hamabul uvein anshe Sodom, whether or not we're talking about the generation of the flood, or whether or not we're talking about the people of Sodom, meaning in both situations, the people of the flood, who were wiped out by the Mabul, and the people of Sodom, who were wiped out when Hashem destroyed Sodom and the other towns in that area. Lo nisgou, they did not become conceited, ela bishvil rov hatova, except through the great abundance and goodness shehishbia lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Hashem blessed them with. Ki de'isa hasam, as it states over there in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. So let's pause here. If we're not familiar with this idea, it's a very unusual and interesting idea. The Gemara in Sanhedrin teaches that both at the time of the door of the flood, the generation of the Mabul, and at the time of the people of Sodom, Hashem had blessed those people with great wealth and great abundance. And it was because of the blessings of wealth and abundance that they were led to transgress. They became haughty, they became conceited, they became complacent and arrogant, and that led them to sin in the different ways, in the various ways that they sinned, again, in both the case of the Dor HaMabul, the generation of the flood, and the people of Sodom. Mishum hachi ka'amar Rav Yehuda, because of this, Rav Yehuda says, Ra'im begufam vechatoim b'mamonam. Rav Yehuda says they were evil, which again means lower level sins with their body, with their bodies, vechatoim, and they did more serious sins b'mamonam with their money. Dahainu, this means she'al chet gufam, the sins of the bodies that the people of Sodom did, shehu haznus, which is a reference to sexual immorality, promiscuity, yecholim lehisnatzel. They could give an excuse for that. Sherov hatova shehishbia lahem, because of the great abundance and wealth that Hashem blessed them with, garam lahem lachto. That's what caused them to sin. K'diamrinan be'alma, as we have a general statement made in the Gemara, moshel lemelech, this can be compared to a king, v'chulei, etc., v'sola kis shel zohav b'tzavoro, and this wealthy king dresses his son up in beautiful clothes and puts a purse of gold around his neck, v'chulei, etc., and the etc. is he has his servants place the son outside of a house of ill repute. Ma yaseh haben shelo yecheta. What can the son possibly do to escape from sinning in such a case? Top of the next column. So let's explain before we continue. So what the Zera Shimshon is saying is that the people of Sodom had a somewhat reasonable excuse for the promiscuity, which is based on the idea that Hashem gave them so much wealth, that it made them so arrogant and it made them so wealthy that they tried to find ways to use their wealth, and that led them to use their wealth for sins such as such as being promiscuous, such as going to houses of ill repute, as the Gemara actually uses that mashal in the which is a reference in the Gemara to the Chet HaEgel. Hashem gave them so much gold that it led them in a way to sin with gold, to make the golden calf. So too, the mashal of the king who gives his son all kinds of untold wealth and all kinds of privileges and puts him up, so to speak, sets him up to sin, and of course the son sins. So too, that's what happened. From one perspective, one could look at it as an excuse for the people of the generation of the flood, of the people in Sodom when they were promiscuous. They sinned begufim with their bodies. Aval zeh hisnatzlus, but this excuse, eino moil lahem, could not ultimately help them. De'im came, because if so, amaiha you gozlim v'chomtzim zeh zeh. If they had so much wealth and they want to use that as an excuse as to why they became promiscuous, then how are they going to explain that they also sinned by stealing from each other? V'chule, etc. V'loha you nosnim tzedakah, and they didn't give to poor people. V'lachein nischatem gzardinam, and therefore their verdict was sealed, because of the fact that the same excuse that they were trying to use to escape punishment for their promiscuous behavior adds to their guilt and their sin when it came to how they sinned in financial matters by stealing from other people and by not giving tzedakah and not being charitable. So that's the way that Rav Yehuda understands the words in the psukim of Ra'im v'chatoyim. The lower level is Ra'im because it refers to promiscuity, for which they had somewhat of an excuse. But then Chatoyim refers to more serious financial sins, because their excuse about God gave us so much money puts them right on the fire in the hot seat for stealing and for not giving tzedakah. Next paragraph. V'chi heichi dilo tikshe, and in order not to ask a question, de'af al v'chatoyim b'mamonam, that even on the more serious sins that they did with their money, efshar sheyesh lahem hisnatzlus, you might say they also have an excuse, mishum mayim genuvim yimtaku, because of what the pasuk in Mishlei teaches us, that stolen waters taste sweeter. That pasuk in Mishlei, Chazal use that in different places to say that people are attracted to stealing. We're attracted to taking something that doesn't belong to us because it seems sweeter that way. It seems more enjoyable and more pleasurable to use something that we've gotten through stealing it than through our own hard work. Ve'eno kol kach pesha, and therefore the financial sins that the people did in the time of Sodom shouldn't be viewed as being so serious and so malicious. Mishum hachi hashas mevi hamasni satana. It's precisely because of that issue that the Gemara in Sanhedrin that we originally saw in the first paragraph brought in the opinion of the Brisa. V'chule, etc. It's a hainu, which means bishlama. It makes sense. Im lo hayu gomvim v'gozlim. If the people in Sodom had not stolen and robbed elamide devarachilu shasiya, except things that were for eating and drinking. In other words, if all they stole was food and drinks, then it would make sense for them to have a little bit of an excuse about stolen waters taste sweeter. They could have used that excuse. But those people in the time of Sodom would steal a neighbor's money completely. They would take all his money. They wouldn't just try and break into the guy's house and take his cake and ice cream. They would go break into the house and take all of his money. And how much more so did they steal everything from guests who would come into the town of Sodom and the neighboring areas. That's what they were known for. They were infamous for their way of mistreating guests and stealing all of their money and property. And since Hashem had blessed them with tremendous goodness and abundance, they certainly didn't need the money from other people and from visitors to the town. And when we were talking about stealing money and similar things, ain't svara shel mayim genuvim. There's no reason. It's not logical to say this idea of, oh, they were so tempted because stolen waters taste sweeter. Lemisha kvar yesh lo nechasim berubim, to someone who already has a lot of property. V'lo hoyu lohem ligzol zeh zeh, and they certainly should not have stolen from each other. The people of Sodom were blessed with wealth, and yes, that might have led them towards promiscuity, but it certainly can't. We certainly can never say they were justified in stealing from each other. V'zehu ro'im b'mamonam, and this is what it means, that they were evil with their money. Next paragraph. V'im tomar, and if you say la'olam yesh lahem hisnatzlus lomar, forever they have an excuse to say she'ein odem meis v'chatzi ta'avoso biyodo. This is another statement made in Chazal. No person dies having fulfilled even half of his ta'avos, half of his desires. That never happens. Every person who leaves this world, if that person were asked right before they pass from this world, were you able to fulfill your desires? The person would answer, if the person were answering honestly, and we know when a person dies, they speak on is on the deathbed or about to die, they speak honestly, they would say, I haven't even fulfilled half of my desires. Isle meya boy moson, as we also say, if a person has 100, they want 200. People always want more. They want double what they have, no matter how much they have. If you have 1 million, you want another 1 million. Ki de'isu b'medrash Koheles, as it states, as Chazal state in the Medrash on Koheles. Umishum hachi, and because of this, hayu gozlim ze'edzel malos ta'avosam. Because of that reasoning, this new reasoning, that's why they stole. The people of Sodom stole from each other, because they wanted more and more. Yes, they had money. Yes, Hashem had blessed them. But we just said, quoting from sources in Chazal, that people always want more. If they have 100, they want 200. If they even when they leave this world, they don't look back and say, oh, I accomplished and had everything I wanted. No, I didn't even have half of the things I wanted, no matter how much wealth they had. And it wasn't their intention, according to this reasoning, to sin maliciously for no reason. If so, if that's how they felt, then they were obviously not happy and satisfied with the goodness that Hashem gave them. And it wouldn't make sense to say about them that analogy of the king who gave his son all the money and the beautiful clothing, and that led the son to sin. What could the son do? But the people in Sodom, according to what we're saying now, did financial sins because they weren't satisfied with the blessings Hashem had given them financially. Therefore, why did they commit sins of promiscuity? What we see is they had no excuse, meaning the excuses that they could use contradicted each other. If you give it an excuse for the znus, for the physical immorality or sexual immorality, that's going to run counter to the excuse that they would try and use for the financial sins, and vice versa. If they give an excuse for why they committed the financial sins, that's going to run counter to the excuse they might use for the promiscuity. So you see that the people of Sodom had no way out, and Ro'im v'chatoyim tells you that they were both both evil and both sinful, and any excuse they might give for the evil behavior is contradicted by the sinful behavior, and any excuse for the sinful behavior is contradicted by the evil behavior. Umeata, next paragraph, and from now, Rav Yehuda umasnisa lo pligi klal. For now that we understand everything, all the points that the Zera Shimshon has developed, he says we can go back and say that Rav Yehuda and the Brisa do not argue. We might have thought when we first read the excerpt from the Gemara in Sanhedrin in the first paragraph that there was a clear machlokas, a clear argument between the opinion of Rav Yehuda, who understood the words Ra'im v'chatoim one way, and the Brisa that was brought in the Gemara that understood it apparently in the opposite way. Now Zera Shimshon says, no, they're not really arguing. They're actually complementary. They're supporting each other. V'hamuvan harishon hem divrei Rav Yehuda. The first understanding of the words, meaning the most basic, straightforward understanding of the words Ra'im v'chatoim, that is represented by the opinions of Rav Yehuda, opinion of Rav Yehuda. Umishum hachi Rashi olav hashalom, and because of this, Rashi, may rest in peace. Next page on the right. Tofas svarazo. Rashi grabbed on to the opinion of Rav Yehuda, not because he disagreed with the Brisa opinion in the Brisa, but the Rav Yehuda and the Brisa agreed. But Rashi said, "Let me go with the simpler approach and the most basic way of understanding the words in the pasuk, mibnei shehi yoser krova lepshat, because it's closer to the simpler way of understanding the pasuk, which is what Rashi embraces." The ode, and another thing, the mashmoos milas roim hainu biznus. Rashi also felt that the word roim, evil, tends to be used in terms of promiscuity. Kedichsiv, as the pasuk says, vayehi er bechor Yehuda ra. Er, the firstborn son of Yehuda, was ra, was evil, and over there it's talking about sins of a sexual nature. So we see the word ra refers to that, etc. This is not so when we talk about the opinion of the Brisa. Shehi benuya, it is built, or it focuses al svaras mayim genuvim yimtaku, on the idea of stolen waters are sweeter. The onkelos tirgem kisvaras hamasnisa, and onkelos followed the opinion of the Brisa, lefi she'ein aleha tshuva klal, because there is no response, there is no way of getting out of the opinion of the Brisa. The Brisa, so to speak, is what sealed the verdict of the people of Sodom. So let's pause here for a moment to understand the chidush, the novel idea that the Zera Shimshon has introduced, and how he used it to answer his original questions. So we started off by thinking that Rav Yehuda and the Gemara in Sanhedrin and the Brisa brought in that Gemara were disagreeing with each other. That's how we started, because it seemed like Rav Yehuda was saying, okay, the word ra'im, evil, is referred to sexual sins, promiscuity, and the word chatoim is referring to sins of a financial nature, like stealing and robbing and not giving tzedakah. And we thought, well, that's exactly the opposite of what the Brisa says, because the Brisa says ra'im, evil, refers to financial sins of a financial nature, and v'chatoim, and sinful, refers to sins of a physical nature. And so now the Zera Shimshon says that is not the way to understand that Gemara. That Gemara should be understood with Rav Yehuda and the Brisa working together. They're not disagreeing with each other, because as the Zera Shimshon asked in the very beginning, Rav Yehuda, as an Amora, later authority, can't disagree with the Brisa. He can't argue against an earlier source written by Tanoim, written by sages and authorities of an earlier generation. So Zera Shimshon answers that question by saying they're not arguing. They're complementing each other, because each of them understands that the words in the pasuk have to be coming together to support the fact that Hashem decided to wipe out the people of Sodom, which means they had no justification and no valid excuse for what they were doing. And so therefore, the words had to be explained in that way. And Rav Yehuda said, looking at it from a basic level, here's how to explain the words. And then the Brisa said, and looking at it from a more deeper level, here's how to explain the words. And together, the two opinions make it so that the people of Sodom had no way of escaping punishment and no way to come up with a justifiable excuse for what they were doing. Next paragraph. Ulefi derech zeh. According to this approach, yisortu, we can answer hastiros sheyesh lonu b'divrei Chazal, a certain contradiction in the words of Chazal be'inyan dor hamabul when it comes to the subject of the people of the generation of the flood. Shebamokam echad amru, in one place Chazal say, Shelonis chatem gzardinom, the fate of those people at the time of the flood wasn't sealed, ella al hagezel, except through the fact that they were committing robbery. That's what sealed their fate. Ubamakam acher, in another place, Amru Chazal said, Shehayu ba'avon haznus, their fate was sealed because of the sin of promiscuity. So that seems again to be an apparent contradiction. We have two different statements by Chazal, and they contradict each other. They seem to contradict each other. V'hayefei Toar, in the commentary of Yefei Toar, Tirit Sham, he explains over there, Sha'agodos chalukos hein, that these two statements of Chazal disagree with each other, just like we can have an argument between two sages in the time of the Mishnah, in a Mishnah, or an argument between two sages in the time of the Gemara, between Amoraim. We can have two statements in the Medrash that disagree with each other. That's what the Yefei Toar says. Milvad mashe teratznu le'el b'makomo. Besides what we explained and how we answered that issue, how we explained that issue back in its place in Parshas Noach, al pasuk batishaches haaretz, on the pasuk of the land was corrupted. We can also explain it according to the approach we've developed in this piece, the Zera Shimshon says. Shaharei bein dor hamabul vein anshe Sodom, whether or not you're talking about the people of the flood, or whether or not you're talking about the people of Sodom, nisgou, they became arrogant, bishvil rov hatova, because of the goodness that Hashem gave them. V'chein isu b'medrash, and so it states in the Medrash al pasuk, on the pasuk, Zaka Sodom ve'amora kiraba. The pasuk says the crying out of the people of Sodom, meaning of the victims, the crying of the victims of the wicked people in Sodom and Amora kiraba. It's very great. Rabba, that word much or many, rabba or great, also is used by the people of the Dor Hamabul, of the people of the flood. Hashem saw that the evil of the people in the time of the generation of the flood was very great. L'gezera shava, and that allows us to compare the people of Sodom and the people of the Dor Hamabul. Shenidonu shnehem, both of them were judged and punished be'esh, with fire, u'mayim, and with water. Vidok, and you should examine this more carefully. What the Zera Shimshon is saying here, kind of just at the very end, is opens up its own door to a very interesting and lesser known idea, and that is that when it comes to the people of the flood, it's clear that they were punished with water. But the Zera Shimshon is saying they were also punished with fire, not just water. And when it comes to the people of Sodom, it's clear that they were punished by fire, but the Zera Shimshon says they were also punished with water. Part of their punishment came through water, even though that's not apparent in the psukim, but it's learned through this Gezerah Shava of Rabba. Gezerah Shava allows us to compare two different situations, two different cases, are here two different episodes. So we say that there's a comparison taught to us by the use of the same word Rabba, great, are many, by the people of Sodom and their sins, and by the people of the flood and their sins. And that teaches us that each of them shared part of the punishment of the other. And that comparison also stands true in terms of the fact that they might have thought they had excuses to use for their behavior, but in the end, Hashem said, your excuses cannot be used to justify your behavior, and therefore he executed judgment upon both groups of people, the people of the flood and the people of Sodom. Yasher koach for joining us in the learning of this on this week's Parsha. We look forward, God willing, to learning again in the Zera Shimshon on next week's Parsha.